Chosen one, this is your confirmation. Do not leave this season yet. What God is preparing for you is far closer than you think. Have you ever considered that some of the most important events in your life may begin long before you are aware of them? We often imagine that love begins at the first conversation, the first glance, or the first meeting. But Scripture repeatedly presents a different pattern. God begins his work long before people recognize it. The visible moment is simply the unveiling of something that has already been developing in secret. That idea changes the way we think about waiting. Many people experience waiting as though life has stopped. They measure time by what they have not received. They count birthdays, anniversaries that never happened, relationships that failed, and prayers that still seem unanswered. But from God's perspective, waiting is rarely empty. It is often the place where invisible foundations are being laid. Imagine an architect constructing a cathedral. For months, perhaps even years, those passing by see little more than trenches, stones, and scaffolding. To an impatient observer, it appears as though nothing meaningful is happening. Yet the architect knows that the strength of the entire structure depends on what is hidden beneath the surface. The foundation must exist before the beauty can appear. God often works in precisely this way. The remarkable possibility is that while you have been asking God about your future spouse, He may also have been preparing another person who has no idea that your story and theirs are moving toward the same destination. They may not know your name. They may not live in your city. They may even believe they are simply navigating ordinary challenges. Yet beneath those ordinary experiences, God may already be shaping both lives with extraordinary precision. This is difficult for modern minds to accept, because we are conditioned to believe that only visible progress is real progress. We trust calendars, notifications, and measurable milestones. We want proof before we believe. But faith reverses that order. Faith trusts that God's unseen work is often more significant than our visible circumstances. Psychologically, this makes profound sense. Human beings are rarely prepared for life's greatest gifts the moment they desire them. We think we need the opportunity, when often we first need the character. We believe the answer will solve our problems, while God understands that the wrong version of life and so can damage the very blessing we have been praying to receive. Perhaps your future spouse is experiencing something similar. Maybe they have begun questioning relationships that once seemed satisfying. Maybe they are discovering that success, possessions, or temporary excitement cannot silence a deeper longing. Perhaps they feel an unexpected restlessness they cannot explain. They assume it is confusion, yet it could be preparation. God has a remarkable way of creating dissatisfaction with what no longer belongs in our lives, before introducing what does. Notice how often this pattern appears throughout Scripture. Before new seasons arrive, old certainties begin to lose their grip. Comfortable routines become uncomfortable. Familiar places suddenly feel too small. People begin asking questions they never thought to ask before. This is not always evidence that life is falling apart. Sometimes it is evidence that God is rearranging the heart to receive something greater. The fascinating truth is that two people can be growing toward one another without either realizing it. Each lesson learned, each disappointment endured, each prayer whispered in solitude may become another thread in a design only God can fully see. This should also transform how you interpret your own loneliness. Loneliness often whispers that nothing is happening. Faith gently answers that much is happening beyond your ability to observe. One voice measures absence, the other measures purpose. There is a philosophical principle worth considering here. We often judge reality by appearance, but reality has never depended upon our awareness of it. The sun continues to exist behind the clouds. Roots continue to grow beneath frozen ground. A child continues to develop before birth. The hidden stage is not less real because it is unseen. In many cases, it is the most important stage of all. The same may be true of your future. God's preparations rarely announce themselves with dramatic signs. More often, they unfold quietly through ordinary days. that later reveal themselves to have been extraordinary all along. Looking back, people frequently realize that what seemed like random delays, unexpected changes, or unanswered prayers were actually careful adjustments leading them exactly where they needed to be. So instead of asking only, "When will I meet the person God has prepared?" perhaps begin asking another question. Who is God preparing me to become before that meeting takes place? Because when God writes two stories into one, He does not simply arrange an introduction. He prepares two hearts capable of recognizing the gift when it finally arrives. And that is the thought worth carrying with you today. Asterisk. The greatest evidence that God is working is not always what you can see. It is who you are becoming while you cannot yet see it. Asterisk. If that hidden preparation is taking place, then another question naturally follows. What does it actually feel like when God begins preparing someone for a relationship they have not yet entered? We often expect divine preparation to be dramatic, a voice from heaven, a miraculous sign, or a sudden certainty. Yet both scripture and human experience suggest something much quieter. More often than not, God begins with an inner disturbance before He grants outward clarity. That may sound strange at first. Why would God allow restlessness before giving peace? Because the human heart rarely seeks something greater while it remains completely satisfied with something smaller. Change usually begins with a holy dissatisfaction. Think about your own life. Some of your greatest decisions were probably not made because everything was comfortable. They were made because comfort stopped being enough. A career that once seemed fulfilling suddenly felt empty. A friendship no longer encouraged growth. A habit that once brought pleasure began to leave behind only exhaustion. The discomfort itself became an invitation to move forward. The same principle often applies to relationships. Your future spouse may be living what appears to be an ordinary life. They wake up, go to work, spend time with family, pursue personal goals, and move through familiar routines. Yet beneath those routines, something has begun to shift. Conversations that once entertained them now feel shallow. Relationships that once seemed promising now expose deeper incompatibilities. Achievements that once felt satisfying no longer answer the questions quietly forming within their heart. Psychologically, this is significant. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to ignore deeper needs when life remains predictable. But once the soul begins recognizing the difference between temporary satisfaction and lasting purpose, predictability loses its power. The person starts searching, often without realizing exactly what they are searching for. Spiritually, this is even more profound. Throughout the Bible, God frequently prepares people by unsettling them before He redirects them. He interrupts false security before revealing genuine purpose. This pattern can seem uncomfortable because we naturally associate peace with God's presence. Yet there are moments when God's presence first exposes our restlessness so that true peace can eventually take root. Imagine trying to fill a cup that is already full of muddy water. No matter how pure the new water is, it cannot transform the cup until the old contents are emptied. Likewise, before God introduces something new, He often reveals why the old cannot remain. Perhaps your future spouse has recently experienced disappointments they never expected. Maybe plans have fallen apart. Perhaps opportunities they desperately wanted have disappeared without explanation. It is tempting to interpret these events as failures. But what if they are not failures at all? What if they are carefully placed boundaries, designed to prevent them from settling for a life that falls short of God's intention? This is one of the great paradoxes of faith. Closed doors often feel like rejection in the present, but appear as protection in hindsight. You may never know how many wrong relationships God prevented before leading two right people toward one another. That thought should inspire humility rather than frustration. We often ask God to accelerate His plans while forgetting that speed is not His highest priority. Transformation is. God is never merely trying to bring two individuals together. He is seeking to unite two people who have learned wisdom, patience, compassion, forgiveness, and trust through experiences they would never have chosen for themselves. This explains why emotional restlessness should not always be feared. There is destructive anxiety that pulls people away from truth, but there is also constructive restlessness that awakens people to truth. The first leaves a person hopeless. The second invites them to grow. One produces despair. The other produces surrender. Your future spouse may not even recognize what is happening within them. They may describe it as feeling different, feeling unsettled, or sensing that life is about to change. Friends may not understand it. Family may encourage them simply to ignore those feelings and continue as before. But the heart cannot permanently ignore what God persistently whispers. The remarkable thing is that while God may be stirring their heart, He is likely stirring yours as well, though perhaps in different ways. Two separate journeys can unfold simultaneously, without either traveler realizing they are approaching the same destination. That is why comparison becomes so dangerous. Looking at someone else's relationship can tempt you to believe that you have fallen behind. But God's timing has never operated according to another person's calendar. Every story carries its own lessons, its own seasons, and its own pace. The delay you resent today may be preparing the wisdom you will depend on tomorrow. Instead of asking why your life looks different from everyone else's, ask whether God is teaching you something that could not be learned any other way. Because the greatest preparation for love is not learning how to find the right person. It is becoming the kind of person who can recognize, receive, and faithfully cherish the gift when God places it before you. So whenever life begins to unsettle your heart, resist the urge to assume everything is falling apart. Sometimes what feels like chaos is actually careful preparation. God often disturbs what is temporary so He can establish what is eternal. And the heart that is willing to grow will never mistake preparation for punishment. If God is preparing another heart, then it becomes impossible to ignore an equally important truth. He is also preparing yours. This is where many people become discouraged, because they assume the waiting season exists only to test their patience. But Scripture suggests something far more meaningful. Waiting is not simply the passage of time. It is the transformation of the person who is doing the waiting. There is a subtle difference between wanting a blessing and being ready to carry it. We often believe that if God would simply answer our prayer, everything else would naturally fall into place. Yet life repeatedly demonstrates the opposite. A person may receive exactly what they asked for and still lose it because they lacked the pain, wisdom, humility, or emotional maturity to sustain it. Possession alone has never guaranteed preservation. That is why God is deeply concerned with who you are becoming, not merely with what you are receiving. Consider how we usually define readiness. We think readiness means having enough money, reaching a certain age, finding the right opportunity, or meeting the right person. Those things certainly matter, but they are external conditions. God begins with internal conditions. Before He changes your circumstances, He often changes your character, because circumstances can be taken away, but character becomes part of who you are. This is one of the great themes woven throughout Scripture. God rarely places someone into a larger purpose without first enlarging the person themselves. Growth precedes responsibility. Wisdom precedes influence. Faithfulness precedes greater blessings. Why should relationships be any different? Imagine building a magnificent bridge across a wide river. The beauty of the bridge depends not only on its design, but on the strength of the pillars supporting it. If the foundation is weak, the weight it was meant to carry eventually becomes its destruction. Relationships function in much the same way. Many people pray for someone who will love them deeply, yet they have never learned how to receive love without fear. Others ask for honesty, while quietly avoiding difficult conversations. Some long for commitment, while remaining emotionally attached to wounds from previous disappointments. These are not reasons for shame, they are invitations for growth. Psychology teaches us that unresolved experiences often shape present behavior in ways we scarcely recognize. A betrayal from years ago may create suspicion towards someone entirely innocent. Childhood insecurity may cause a person to seek constant reassurance. Fear of abandonment may lead someone to cling too tightly, while fear of rejection may cause another to keep everyone at a distance. Without healing, yesterday quietly becomes the author of tomorrow. God understands this more completely than we ever could. Perhaps that is why your waiting has lasted longer than you expected. Not because God enjoys delay, but because he refuses to allow unhealed wounds to become permanent features of your future marriage. His goal is not simply to unite two people. His goal is to establish a relationship capable of reflecting patience, grace, forgiveness, and enduring love. That kind of relationship cannot be manufactured overnight. It grows through ordinary acts of obedience that often seem unrelated to the future we desire. Learning to forgive someone who never apologized. Choosing integrity when dishonesty would be easier. Developing self-control when emotions demand immediate satisfaction. Serving others without expecting recognition. Trusting God when the silence feels heavier than the answers. None of these experiences may appear connected to meeting your future spouse, yet each one is quietly shaping the person who will eventually enter that relationship. There is also a deeper philosophical truth hidden here. Human beings naturally focus on destinations because destinations are visible. God often focuses on journeys because journeys produce transformation. We celebrate arrival, but God treasures formation. We count milestones, while he measures maturity. This changes the entire meaning of waiting. Waiting is no longer empty space between prayers and answers. It becomes sacred ground where God removes pride, strengthens faith, teaches discernment, and develops compassion. Every difficult season becomes another opportunity to become someone capable of loving more faithfully than before. Notice something remarkable. The strongest trees are rarely those that grew the fastest. Their strength comes from years of unseen development beneath the surface. Deep roots allow them to withstand storms that would uproot younger trees. The same principle applies to the human soul. A relationship built upon emotional excitement alone may flourish briefly, but excitement changes with circumstances. A relationship built upon spiritual maturity possesses something far more durable. It has learned how to remain steady when emotions fluctuate, when misunderstandings arise, and when life becomes difficult. Perhaps this is what God is creating within you right now. Not perfection, because no human being achieves that, but stability. Not flawless confidence, but enduring trust. Not the absence of weakness, but the willingness to surrender weakness to God instead of allowing it to control your choices. Every prayer, every disappointment, every unanswered question, every quiet act of faith may be contributing to a version of yourself that could not have existed any other way. And one day, when you finally meet the person God has prepared, you may discover that the greatest miracle was not simply that he brought you together. It was that he transformed both of you beforehand. So do not measure this season by what you have not yet received. Measure it by who you are becoming. For the greatest preparation for lasting love is not finding the right person first. It is allowing God to make you the right person before love ever arrives. By now, a thoughtful question begins to emerge. If God has been preparing two people in ways that are largely invisible, is there ever a point when those hidden preparations begin to surface? Can someone recognize that a new season is approaching without becoming consumed by Kant's between discernment? Because there is a difference between discernment and obsession. Many people spend years looking for dramatic signs. Every coincidence becomes a prophecy. Every unexpected message feels like a divine announcement. Every new acquaintance is immediately examined as a possible answer to prayer. While this is understandable, it often produces more anxiety than peace. A mind determined to force certainty will eventually begin interpreting ordinary events as extraordinary, simply because it desperately wants an answer. God rarely asks us to build our lives on assumptions. Instead, He teaches us to recognize patterns of transformation rather than isolated moments of excitement. One of the quiet signs that God's timing may be drawing near is not that life suddenly becomes easier, but that your heart becomes steadier. This may seem surprising, because we often expect the opposite. We assume preparation should fill us with increasing anticipation, yet genuine spiritual maturity often produces increasing calm. Consider the difference between desperation and expectation. Desperation demands immediate answers, because it believes happiness cannot exist without their expectation, however, rests confidently, because it trusts that what God has promised will arrive at the proper time. The external circumstances may appear identical, but internally they are worlds apart. A desperate heart constantly asks, "Why hasn't it happened yet?" A peaceful heart quietly says, "When the time is right, I will be ready." That shift is more significant than many people realize. Psychologically, it reflects emotional maturity. Spiritually, it reflects trust. The person has stopped trying to control the future and has begun allowing God to shape the present. Ironically, this surrender often prepares them more effectively than all their previous striving combined. Another sign appears when old desires begin losing their power. Perhaps you once felt compelled to prove yourself to people who overlooked you. Maybe you longed for a relationship simply to escape loneliness or gain validation. Those motivations are deeply human, but they cannot sustain lasting love. Over time, something changes. The desire for approval slowly gives way to the desire for authenticity. Instead of asking, "Who will finally choose me?" you begin asking, "How can I faithfully become the person God created me to be?" That is not a small adjustment. It marks a profound transformation in identity. Healthy relationships are rarely built by two people trying to complete one another. They are strengthened by two people who have learned that their deepest identity already rests securely in God. Love then becomes an expression of wholeness rather than an attempt to fill an emptiness. There are often practical changes as well. Doors that once seemed promising quietly close. At first, these moments feel disappointing. Plans change unexpectedly. Opportunities disappear. People move away. Circumstances shift without explanation. Yet with time, you begin noticing something remarkable. Those closed doors prevented paths that would have led you away from where you truly needed to be. How often have you looked back on life and thanked God for prayers He never answered? At the time, those unanswered prayers felt like silence. Looking back, they reveal themselves as protection. This perspective transforms disappointment. Instead of viewing every obstacle as evidence that God has forgotten you, you begin considering the possibility that He is guiding you with greater wisdom than your limited perspective could ever provide. What appears to be delay may actually be careful direction. Another quiet sign is the growth of discernment. Not suspicion, not fear, discernment. You begin recognizing the difference between temporary attraction and lasting character. You become less impressed by appearances and more attentive to integrity. Qualities like kindness, humility, patience, honesty, and faithfulness begin carrying greater weight than charm or excitement alone. This change reflects genuine maturity, because lasting relationships are built upon character long after emotions fluctuate. Scripture consistently reminds us that outward appearances can be misleading. Human beings naturally notice what is visible. God looks far deeper. As your perspective gradually aligns with His, your priorities begin changing as well. Perhaps the most overlooked sign of all is gratitude. When gratitude grows stronger than frustration, something significant has happened within the soul. You begin appreciating today's opportunities, instead of treating life as though it cannot truly begin until tomorrow arrives. You invest in friendships. You serve others. You pursue wisdom. You enjoy simple blessings without constantly measuring what is still missing. This is not resignation. It is freedom. The remarkable irony is that many people become most prepared for God's next chapter precisely when they stop allowing the future to steal the joy of the present. They remain hopeful without becoming consumed. They remain expectant without becoming anxious. They continue growing even while they continue waiting. That kind of peace cannot be manufactured by positive thinking. It grows through repeated decisions to trust God's character when his timetable remains hidden. And perhaps that is the clearest sign that divine timing is approaching. Not that you possess complete knowledge of the future, but that you no longer need complete knowledge in order to remain faithful today. So resist the temptation to chase spectacular signs while overlooking the quiet miracles already unfolding within you. When God's timing draws near, the loudest evidence is often not a dramatic event. It is a heart that has learned to trust him before the answer ever arrives. This naturally brings us to one of the most difficult questions every waiting heart eventually asks. If God intends something good, why does he allow it to take so long?